Welcome to Jay's Corner. My name is Jae Oh. I am the certified financial planner. I'm also the author of Maximize Your Medicare, the published book. Jay's Corner is there to try to explain how certain financial matters work, to try to help you separate the signal from the noise, so that when something changes, you're not distracted wrongly, and instead keep your eyes on the ball, which is tough to do given the way that we are given information. There's a free and paid newsletter. Go to jo.substack.com. There are 2 YouTube channels, Jay's Corner as well as Maximize Your Medicare. Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, anywhere you digest your podcast. Be sure to leave your comments. It's the most valuable service that I provide. It's not even close. While I can figure out your dental coverage or your individual health insurance, the reality is it's the integration, the combination of all of the moving parts where I'm providing the value. We live in uncertain times. Inflation have eaten into people's retirement savings, their investment plans. The problem is that people are given the answers in piecemeal fashion. And one line item can be correct, but if you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, that does you no good. You need an integrated approach, one that takes into account all of the different moving parts. For different people, the different moving parts, they look differently, they move separately, they don't fit together the same. We're not getting away from that. You know this just by using your common sense. You don't need my fancy degrees. You didn't need to have written a book. You don't need to belong to a think tank. None of it. What you do need to have is a clear vision for yourself. And then from there, you need to be able to put it into words. I'm going to listen. I'm going to listen carefully to hear what's important to you, to hear what your priorities are, to see what worries you, what situations we're trying to avoid. After getting to know you, to know what's important to you, to understand what your financial resources look like, then I'll go to work. Make sure that your narrative, your life story, match the facts. As time goes on, life changes. Your situation changes, your health changes, what's important to you evolves. I'll be with you at each stage. You'll always be able to check in with me. I'm trying to be your lifetime partner. All you need to do is click on the form below, or send me an email, or call. That'll get us started. I'd be happy to talk with you about what your situation is and what you are looking to accomplish. So be sure to click on the link below, fill out the form, reach out to me, and we'll get started. So over the past couple of days, I've been working on describing financial markets as well as talking about Medicare Advantage versus Medigap. And then talking about the politics and the fact that, both sides of the aisle are going to start accusing each other of trying to take away Medicare benefits, etc., because of the fact that as of now, the largest or second largest voting bloc is the baby boomers. The reality is that millennials are now the largest bloc, which I would say is the fault of the AARP, meaning that, if the millennials got their act together and circled the wagons and had American Association of Millennials, that the structure of health insurance payments or of pricing structures would look different. No matter what the AARP says under hashtag no age tax. Different topic, different videos on how the AARP intentionally distorted academic fact in order to further its own agenda something that reality is. I sent a letter to Milliman, who created the study that the AARP then distorted, which to an academic, I'm sure, at Milliman, they probably weren't very happy. Anyway, let's talk about this article here. The point of Medicare Advantage is so complicated. It's clear why the CMS continues to fund Medicare Advantage. It's trying to get control of the healthcare cost curve. The best way for it to do so is to be the price setter. If the biggest payer can push down the cost curve, that can be the new benchmark on which all other healthcare cost services are established. This makes entire sense. Principally, this makes complete logical sense. Why? Because the idea that we're going to be able to untangle all of the stakeholders involved in our healthcare system in the United States is a non-starter. Hospital, doctor, pharmaceutical, insurance carrier. We're not even talking about nurses, skilled nursing facilities, technology-based diagnostics groups. Each of these groups is super smart. They'll have their own very rational reason for disagreeing with, some sweeping systematic change. To make it more complicated, what ended up happening is that, this is not when you're building a car. When you're building a car, right, we've got a certain set of discrete parts. The manufacturer can bid out all of the parts, right? They can bid out all the parts for a car. I know nothing about cars, by the way, so I shouldn't be talking about cars. Let's pretend I knew something about cars. Carburetor, transmission, guidance, GPS guidance system. Right? The one assembling the car can then bid out each of the individual components and have them assembled. That doesn't work under health insurance. The reason is because of the entanglements, meaning that the doctor is the employee of the hospital. The hospital may or may not be the owner of a durable medical equipment company that the doctor who is the employee, prescribes. And you can see, and I've oversimplified it, to a dramatic degree. In other words, we can't quite get a handle on all pricing out all of the ingredients inside of this very complicated minestrone soup. We can't. We could try. I think we'll fail. For example, right now, right? Apparently, allegedly, the cost of hospital services is now a matter of public record, and all the deals that a particular hospital system has set with different insurance carriers. Apparently, that exists. That said, what I'm going to suggest here today is then, which is going to take a few minutes, but, is a lot slicker than that. Meaning that I'm trying to get a simple way. A simple way, and one that, candidly could be implemented, but also just as candidly, there's no way the stakeholders will agree. No way. Let's just take a look here. This is the article in the New York Times. It came out, I don't know, the past few months. I made mention of it when it first was published. The cash monster was insatiable, how insurers exploited Medicare for billions. Do I think there's a path that this can occur? I don't think there's any question. The answer is yes. And before we start throwing rocks, the fact of the matter is that I could name any number of businesses. How about general contractor for construction site? Okay. In other words, the contractors are just a half a step of the safety code. That doesn't mean necessarily that they are blatantly, violating the code just to make money. Under Medicare, however, what you can see here is there are a number of different areas where you can hide behind diagnosis and the actual cost, right? In other words, I could estimate that the hurricane is going to hit Tampa. I could then create a bunch of costs to preventing a catastrophe. But then after the fact, the hurricane can swerve out of the way and miss Tampa. In the same way, a doctor, a hospital, etc., can code a particular patient, right? You're Mr. Sick a lot. You are, or your Jabba the Hutt, right? You weigh 450 pounds, you're 3'5", you eat rats. You're probably not in the best health. That doesn't mean that Jabba the Hutt is actually sick, right? Jabba the Hutt can display characteristics of a person who usually gets sick. That is not precisely the same as Jabba the Hutt requires healthcare services. And you will know this, right? Because you've met a person who destroys themselves for healthcare purposes, right? I mean, right? Jack Daniels in the morning, cigarettes all day, other types of narcotics at night. Never sick, right? And you know this type of person, right? They don't treat their body necessarily very well, but they don't get ill. And what you end up having then is you could have under Medicare Advantage, under this particular situation, a higher risk adjustment because of the fact that this person is, for example, diabetic. They could be a diabetic and on insulin, but then have no other real health situation that would require healthcare services, whereas the other person who is 50 pounds lighter, also type 1 diabetic, has to go to the doctor, weekly. And these two people can coexist in this planet for sure. The issue here then is that the Medicare Advantage carrier gets paid an extra amount as a result of the fact that a Medicare Advantage, member is Mr. Sick-a-Lot. And that's described here in this article. And I'm not going to reread the article to you, but you can see it. Health Care System called doctors and urged them to add additional illnesses to the medical records of patients they hadn't seen in weeks. Doctors who found enough new diagnoses could earn bottles of champagne or a bonus in their paycheck. And this is the kind of thing I'm trying to get to, right? In other words, this is not the same topic that I was talking about in the publicly available videos, right? That is different. That is very different. And it may look similar because they have Medicare Advantage associated with it, but they are not the same. The idea that you're just going to, say, well, the idea that you're going to say, let's just fix this by eliminating Medicare Advantage, you need to remember what I said at the very beginning of this video, which is there's very good reason for Medicare Advantage to exist, which is to drive down the cost curve. I didn't say to be single payer. I don't think that that is going to work, right? But as the biggest payer, could it then be the one dictating price or establishing benchmark pricing? The answer for me to that is yes. And that alone can justify the existence of Medicare Advantage. There are going to be some people who get, from behind the pulpit saying, well, the government shouldn't this, the government shouldn't that, we shouldn't have, profit company, this, that. Okay, different topic, right? That is Philosophy of Government in American Life 301. Yeah, that's a college course, where you can theorize, amongst yourselves, with a glass of wine or, some other adult beverage and debate. I'm not here about that. Right. In other words, that to me is such a different topic regarding, government involvement in a particular area of life. Okay. I'm not here to settle that. However, what I am here to suggest is a possible path out, and it's here. And it exists, which is that what ends up happening on a Medicare Advantage is you have member number one, they get an allowance. I've described this in the past. Right. It's an allowance. The allowance has a particular benchmark. It's a stated benchmark price. And let's just call this $500. So let's call the benchmark $500 a month that goes to Medicare Advantage carrier. They take the $500. They anticipate how many enrollees, members they're going to have. They start divvying out the $500 like a child would with their allowance. Okay? So they bought an Xbox game, they bought a bicycle. They bought a new mobile phone. Whatever they did. Okay? The child is then determining what they're going to do with the allowance they got from their parent. In the same way, that is what Medicare Advantage carriers are doing. They know that they're going to get a particular amount of money. They have then go about their business and saying, okay, well, we have this allowance of $500, and now let's start divvying it up and creating new designs for plans next year. That process is about to begin, by the way, meaning the first bids are going to, they've got very complicated advance work to do, the carriers. Now, the nuance number one here is that if you have a very highly rated set of plans, you can actually get a bonus on top of 500. So now let's call it 600. So now you can understand why the carriers are motivated to get high star ratings. This is problematic for me because what this is doing is this is handing control to the carriers who are half a step ahead of the regulator to understand the way that the star rating is established and configuring their benefits for the purpose of getting the highest star rating so that their allowance is not 500 but it's 600. And again, this is not me behind a pulpit. And before I hear objections to this, I'm just going to say, if you put on your practical reality hat on and put on your common sense jacket, what you will hear is every business works this way. Every. Right? You hire an accountant to go up to the line of IRS regulation. You hire attorneys to do the very same thing. So now we're back here. We have the star rating. We've got this per diem system of $500. And here, actually, my my suggestion, alteration, modification to the way that this system works then takes hold. My simple suggestion is that this $500 here is a phantom number. This $500 is created by some study by the CMS, who has tried to figure out kind of what the pay for services would be. But what Medicare Advantage carriers are doing, they're taking the per diem and they're going and, negotiating with the doctors, negotiating with the hospitals, negotiating with all the background details, of which there are tons. And then they're saying, okay, we're going to be able to spend $480 and we're going to keep 20 out of 500, right? And remember that there is a medical loss ratio. They've got to prove that they are using X percent of all of the 500 that they're getting. That still applies. But you can see right from the beginning, something to me now is weird, is that and there's a reason that I, sequenced today's video in this way, which is it's so complicated and entangled amongst the very highly qualified stakeholders that undoing it is probably the impossible task, that we probably will not see the day where we can actually get full transparency. I'm just the practical reality, Jay with his practical reality hat on just finds that an impossible outcome. So instead, why don't we flip this around and instead let the carriers bid on what's the lowest amount they'll accept for an allowance and still stay in business. Meaning, if you said the $500 number is just an assumption, and then you're allowing the carriers to take the $500 and then do all of their work in the background and then figure out whether or not they can make it fit. Why is that the path that we are using? For me, it's far more efficient to tell the carriers, look, you're going to tell us the number. And if you can't hit the number, you don't get approval at all. 0. Meaning that some carrier says, hey, I need to receive 550. But if all the other carriers will receive 490, the person at 550, why is he even in the market? In other words, I would turn the screws, increasing the heat, the fire, on the parties who are most in control of the data and information. And, oh yeah, by the way, who are trying to pummel their counterparts, right? This is zero sum, right? Carrier number 1 doesn't want really carrier number 2 to succeed. The way to do that is just let them compete against each other. And they will. Fiercely. How sure am I on that? Medigap at a complete tie. 5 carriers within $5 a month. I'm pretty sure that the guys with the calculators are ready to compete. How would this work? This precedent exists today. This is not like new technology. This is not a new technique that I am, proposing. You can see it right here. No, I'm not interested in being an educated investor. I am an educated investor. All we'd have to do is create the Dutch auction. So what a Dutch auction is everyone bids on the 500. So now let's just say that we need to serve in the state of Indiana. Let's say it was 10 million. And now you divided it up, and we'll have the different carriers bid for how much they're going to be able to deliver their set of plans into Indiana. And let's say that carrier number 1 says it's 480. They'll take $480. Carrier number 2 says $470. And then they have to say, okay, we'll serve 408 at 480 up to 5 million. And then the one at 470 says we'll serve at 470 up to 3 million. Until you got to the full population, which the data exists for sure. So basically what ends up happening is you're going to continue to have bid at a lower amount, the lowest amount that they will accept and still be in business. As a result of that, let's say the clearing price to get to service all of the 10 million people in Indiana, the clearing price is $465. Now, then everyone who has bid $465 and lower gets awarded contracts. They have the right to offer plans for the next year. And if those persons who said, hey, let's pick off the government and let's receive 510, yeah, but the market clearing price was $465. At 510, here's the number of contracts you get to offer, 0. This process is called Dutch auction. This is called Dutch auction. In other words, there is a market precedent for it. And how sure am I of this? This is how U.S. government bonds are auctioned. You know, you turn on CNBC like some weird weekday at 2 o'clock. You'll say, bond auction went well. Bond auction went terribly. You know, like all this, complicated technical language. Well, here's the bid, here's the dispersion, here's the indirect bids, and here's the tail. Right? Because they're describing the nature of all of the carriers bidding for the $10 billion of Treasury bonds. In the same way, we can have the carriers line up and just say, okay, we've got this amount of population to serve. We're not going to tell you what their market share is. You're going to keep serving them. But you're going to tell us what your price is going to be. Because this is doing a couple of things. Number one, you can see that the government saved money. Right? 500 is no longer your number. 465 is the number. We've saved 35. Right? Doesn't sound like much, right? It's a lot. Right? Because you can remember from the prior video that is publicly available, right? I showed you the scaling. Right? In other words, I've saved 8%. Okay. That's a lot different than 0.0027%. Right? So as a result, you'll have a lower clearing price. Because why? The barbarians at the gate, the ones who are trying to gouge each other's eyes out under the competitive arena, they'll be aggressive for you. They know that the mechanics of what they can drive deals with the doctor, hospital, pharmaceutical, durable medical equipment providers, and all the other ancillary benefits. They'll know it better. In other words, the chefs understand the cost of the ingredients and how to efficiently create the can of soup at the highest margin most efficiently. And if they know that across the street is another soup manufacturer who's just as smart, who has the same data and has the same calculating power, which they will have, for sure. That we can bank on. What you have is the competitive market driving down the 500 down to the efficient market price. Because basically it's waving a white flag by me to say, hey, I would love to have transparency about how much all of these things cost and allow the free market to be able to compete this stuff away. But nah, that's not working. Instead, it's cleaner, simpler by having the Dutch auction process come to Medicare Advantage. From there, carrier can lose money. That's their problem. That's their problem, candidly. Right? Has this happened in the past? Sure it has. We've had insurance companies miscalculate, misestimate their costs. We certainly have. It doesn't last very long, by the way. Right? There will be a market adjustment over time. Anyway, the bottom line is this would streamline the process, and also what it would do, it would take away your path to make this possible. This now becomes impossible, right? So fine, you want to have a bonus? Fine. But you don't get any risk adjust. You don't get from 500 to 600 here because you've bid on the single number you're going to get. This would eliminate the star system. This would eliminate the idea that you could have upcoding to get extra. There is no extra bonus here. There's a single number for the allowance that the carrier would accept, and the market would be the one who's driving the result. Then, when you multiply that by 30 million, now you can have actual progress towards the enormous numbers, 827 billion or something like that for 2023 going to be paid into the Medicare system. We need to make progress. We need it fast. Trying to do it piecemeal, trying to call the AMA for their advice? Nah. It goes to show you how far away we are from getting a solution. What I've described here are financial efficiency measures. They are not talking about, calling up experts in Grey's Anatomy. There's a reason for that. That's a different topic. That's it for this video. Subscriber edition to Jay's Corner. You can see why I've got to keep this behind the paywall, right? Because the reality is that to many people, this just does not matter. None of this stuff matters if you're living check to check. It really doesn't, right? I get all that. And nor should it, to be candid with you. They don't have time to consider, pontificate about, government debt, government systems, etc., etc. They care about making their singular Social Security check last until the next month in the face of 6% inflation. I'm not trying to throw a rock at that person. This is still the no judgment zone. What I am saying, though, is that as a result of this, there are ripple effects, and how that comes out. No one's asking me, and I'm not a volunteer for government service.